Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. And a special welcome to all you truly curious listeners still with us. We're so genuinely grateful for your dedication, really. For every subscription, every single one of those buttons you hit, thank you.
It really does mean a lot to us.
It does. But hey, seriously, if you haven't yet, please take just a second and drop us a comment below.
Yeah.
Your opinions. They genuinely matter.
Correct.
We absolutely love hearing your thoughts as we, go on these journeys together.
We really do read them all.
Absolutely. Okay, so today we're picking up on a series that, well, it seems to have really struck a chord with many of you. Civilization resets.
Right, those moments where history just seems to hit a giant reset button.
Exactly. When the slate gets wiped clean and humanity basically has to, find a whole new way forward. This time, our third reset takes us into a really enigmatic, honestly kind of terrifying period. We're calling it the Bronze Age collapse.
A fascinating and incredibly impactful time.
For sure. And if you're just jumping into this series now, you should definitely go back and check out the previous deep dives. There was Younger Dryas' first reset of civilization, and then Sumerian Genesis' second reset of civilization.
Yeah, they really build on each other, showing this incredible pattern almost of resilience, but also fragility.
Totally. It's this amazing tapestry. Now, you know the mission here at the Deep Dive. We grab a whole stack of your sources, articles, cutting-edge research, our own extensive notes.
And the mysterious archive, of course.
Can't forget the mysterious archive. And we basically distill it all down into the most important bits, the key insights.
Yeah.
Think of it as, your ultimate shortcut to being genuinely well-informed, packed with surprising stuff and hopefully just enough humor to keep you hooked.
We try.
We do. And yeah, for those always asking, we are still tapping into the best sources, including that unique archive. Now, I have to tell you, for this deep dive, you're really going to want to stick with us right to the very end. Our conclusions, drawn from what really feels like this constantly unfolding picture of the past, well, they could genuinely astound you. Might make you start looking at the world around us today, right now, in a profoundly different way. We're exploring how these civilization resets might not be quite as accidental as they first appear.
It's a perspective shift, for sure.
Right. So let's plunge in. The Bronze Age collapse, a fascinating, yes, but also terrifying period of just widespread destruction that truly redefined what civilization even meant. It's
a period that, honestly, despite its massive impact, often gets a bit overshadowed in popular history, but its lessons incredibly relevant to our world today, which is, so hyper-connected.
That's so true. And before we get into the collapse itself, the catastrophic unraveling, it's absolutely vital we get a handle on just how sophisticated, how deeply connected the Bronze Age world actually was.
Yes, that context is key.
Because it's easy to picture the ancient world as just, isolated city-states, walled off, not really talking to each other much. But the Bronze Age, we're talking roughly 3,300 to 1100 BC, especially across the Eastern Mediterranean, Anatolia, the Near East, even stretching way out to the Indus Valley. It was anything but insular.
Precisely. This was a really vibrant time, bustling development, loads of innovation. We saw incredible advancements like mastering metallurgy, bronze, obviously, but also copper, silver, gold. The very first writing systems popped up then.
Right. Cuneiform, hieroglyphs.
Exactly. And chariots ruling the battlefields, vast rival empires rising up, challenging each other. But what's truly fascinating, if we connect this to the bigger picture, is that this wasn't just a random collection of separate societies. Far from it. It was, as one historian put it so well, a highly entangled and interdependent reg of societies. A remarkably unified system, really.
A unified system that's a crucial distinction, isn't it? Not scattered villages, but a robust network. You had Mycenaean Greece with its huge citadels, New Kingdom Egypt at its height, the island kingdoms of Cyprus and Crete, bustling coastal cities like Ugarit.
Right, and Babylon under the Kassites, the powerful Assyrians, the mighty Hittite Empire up in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. These weren't strangers. They knew each other well, traded constantly, engaged in complex diplomacy, fought wars, sure, but also learned from each other. It was a constant dynamic exchange.
And the Mediterranean Sea was the highway for all this, wasn't it?
It was the absolute lifeblood. It wasn't some huge barrier. It was more like a vast inland lake. Relatively calm, easy to navigate, perfect for facilitating all this booming trade. And the evidence for this interconnectedness is just amazing, especially from archaeological finds. Probably the most famous is the Uluburun shipwreck.
Ah, yes, the Uluburun wreck. That's always blown my mind. It's like a snapshot of ancient globalization found off Turkey's coast, right? Around 1300 BC.
Exactly. Built of Lebanese cedar, incredibly well preserved. And the cargo, it's just staggering. Goods from at least 7 different lands. It's a time capsule of ancient international trade sitting right there on the seabed.
So what kind of stuff did they find? I remember copper.
Oh, yeah. 10 tons of copper ingots and 1 ton of tin, which is, the exact ratio you need to make about 11 tons of bronze.
Wow.
But it wasn't just metals. There was exotic ebony wood, elephant, and hippo tusks, these vibrant glass beads, foodstuffs like olives, almonds, figs, grapes, pomegranates, even a gold scarab with Queen Nefertiti's name on it.
Nefertiti. From Egypt, on a ship sunk off Turkey.
Yep. Plus arrowheads, daggers, turtle shells, ostrich eggs, quartz crystals, raw gold, pottery, and lamps from Cyprus, big blocks of raw colored glass. It just paints this incredibly vivid picture of immense wealth and a really diverse long-distance exchange network crisscrossing the whole region.
It sounds like a modern container ship's manifest almost.
Yeah.
3,000 years ago. And that brings us to bronze, right? And specifically, the tin needed to make it. That was the crucial bit.
Absolutely crucial. Bronze was the wonder metal. Totally indispensable. Weapons, tools, household stuff. Think of it like aluminum or steel today. Without a steady supply, your armies are useless, your industries grind to a halt, society just unravels. And it's an alloy copper, which was fairly common, and tin, which was incredibly rare.
And super valuable because of it. And that's where the fragility comes in, isn't it? Where did they even get the tin?
Mostly from mines way out in Badakhshan, in modern-day Afghanistan.
Afghanistan, seriously?
Seriously, imagine that journey. Transported overland, probably on donkey caravans across the Silk Road, mountains, rivers. A long, perilous trip just to get it to Mesopotamia, and then it had to be distributed across the Mediterranean.
Wow. That's precarious.
Extremely. British historian Carol Bell made a great comparison. She said, tin then was as strategically vital as crude oil is today. The Hittite king, the Egyptian pharaoh, they obsessed over its supply, just like modern leaders worry about energy. The entire military might of all these great powers, Egypt, Assyria, the Hittites, Mycenaeans, depended completely on this single, fragile supply chain. It must have felt like it was held together by cobwebs.
A powerful image.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just goods moving around, it was people too, right?
Yeah.
Sharing ideas, skills.
Absolutely. We know Minoan artists from Crete decorated palaces in Egypt. Kings were constantly writing to each other, asking for physicians, skilled artisans, weavers, musicians, singers, swapping experts, basically.
And intermarriage too, between royal families.
Oh yeah, that was common. Solidified alliances created these complex family ties across borders. Amurapi, the last king of Ugarit, actually had a Hittite wife. Their divorce apparently became this big international incident, dragged through the courts for years.
No way. See, that's the kind of detail that makes it real, this interconnected world.
Exactly. And if we connect that to the bigger picture, it just highlights how this seemingly stable cosmopolitan system built on all this interdependence.
Well, it was also inherently vulnerable. Its greatest strengths, the trade, the connections, were also, in a way, its biggest weaknesses when things started to go south.
And boy, did they go south. Because right around 1200 BC, the whole landscape just shifted dramatically, terrifyingly, catastrophically.
Indeed. Between 1200 and 1100 BC, right at the end of the Bronze Age, this unprecedented wave of destruction just washed across the entire region. Not just one place, we're talking over 1,000 kilometers. Utter devastation.
It literally wiped whole civilizations off the map, left nothing behind.
Nothing but ruins.
Yeah.
And the scale. It's hard to grasp. Some areas took nearly 1,000 years to recover to anything like a complex society again. It was a genuine apocalypse for them. And the archaeology, it tells this chillingly consistent story.
Like Hattusha, the Hittite capital. I remember reading about that. Hattusha, yeah. Once this glorious, massive fortress, double walls, over 100 towers, huge gates with carved lions, just awe-inspiring. But when you excavate, you find this thin, black layer. Ash, charred wood, rubble, all scorched by this intense fire. Dates right to around 1200 BC.
Total destruction.
Savage, unrelenting, total. And after that, Hattusha was just empty, abandoned for centuries. A haunted place, a ghost of an empire.
And it wasn't just Hattusha, was it?
Not at all. 20 kilometers away, Alakahoyuk, where Hittite kings were buried. Same layers of ash and rubble. 100 kilometers east at Kirgulan. Arrowheads littering the ground like fallen leaves, found right alongside human remains, men, women, children, left lying in the streets where they fell. The brutality is just Staggering.
Heartbreaking. And what about Greece, Mycenae?
Mycenae, yeah, a major center of Greek civilization, southwest of Athens. Huge military stronghold, maybe 30,000 people at its peak. Centuries later, the writer Pausanias talked about its Cyclopean walls so massive people thought only giants could have built them. That's how much memory was lost.
And Mycenae was destroyed too.
Utterly destroyed around the 13th century BC. Its mighty citadel just reduced to ruins.
And Troy. The legendary Troy.
Troy, yes. A grand city, incredible fortifications, walls 9 meters high, towers 18 meters tall. Archaeology shows it was attacked repeatedly. Traces of fire, human remains in houses, in the streets, bronze arrowheads everywhere. It was burned twice towards the end of the 13th century BC.
Makes you think about Homer's Iliad, doesn't it? Maybe it wasn't just myth. Maybe it held some authentic memory of those apocalyptic events that, quote, blood ran in torrents.
Yeah, from Quintus Simultaneous' Fall of Troy.
Visceral, terrifying. And it wasn't just the big names. Ugarit, on the Syrian coast, a booming trade city, multicultural, literate. They had the first private libraries, the oldest written music we know of, a hymn to a goddess.
And it was destroyed.
Completely. Buried under 2 meters of ash and brick, scorched roofs, arrowheads in the streets. People buried their valuables, hoping to come back.
But they never did.
Never returned. Just abandoned.
Gone. Wow. And this happened everywhere. Aleppo, Megiddo, Emar, Megiddo, biblical Armageddon. Yep, total destruction. Megiddo was so bad, the debris was so thick, later people just built right on top of the ruins, couldn't even clear it. Even Cyprus at Kokkinokramos, smiths buried tools, silver, gold. Never came back for it.
The conclusion seems unavoidable then.
Stark and undeniable. Almost every single significant city in the Eastern Mediterranean world was destroyed, many never occupied again. For a long time after 1200 BC, there were basically no major cities in that whole area.
And literacy just vanished.
In many places, yeah, for centuries. No more monumental building. Much of the region just fell into this cultural silence. Oral traditions, like Homer's epics, eventually took over from written history.
So what happened? How could so many advanced societies just disappear? It's one of history's biggest mysteries, right?
Yeah.
And for ages, the blame fell on one group, the Sea Peoples.
Ah, yes, the Sea Peoples, the convenient scapegoat for a long time. They were painted as this, insurmountable invasion force, marauding masses, hell-bent on destruction, like Vikings meet the Huns, just sweeping everyone away.
And the Egyptians kind of backed that up, didn't they? Ramses III's inscriptions.
Oh, absolutely. His temple at Medinet Habu has these dramatic carvings and texts. No lands could stand before their arms. They desolated its people and its land. The Harris Papyrus boasts about crushing them, saying that Jeker and Peliset were made ashes.
Sounds pretty definitive.
And the fall of Ugarit seems like the classic example of their tactics, right? They just show up without warning, wreck everything, destroy the city, and vanish back into the sea. Hammurabi's unsent letter begging for help, saying his troops were away. It perfectly highlights that element of surprise.
But who were they? Really, were they actually like one unified force?
That's the mystery. Even ancient sources are vague. Guesses range from Sardinia or Sicily, maybe Libya, maybe closer shores. The Egyptian carvings show people with distinctive headdresses, sure, but they look like, people, not monsters. And crucially, they seem to have been a loose confederation. Egyptians named different groups. Denuna, Checker, Peliset, Shardana, Weshesh.
So not one big army.
Doesn't seem like it. No single leader is ever mentioned, which is really interesting. And some groups, like the Shardana, had actually served Egypt as mercenaries before, so there's history there.
Okay, so the modern thinking is different, more nuanced.
Much more nuanced. The kind of final theory emerging now reframes them completely, not as villains, but as another set of victims caught up in the chaos.
Victims? How so?
Well, imagine you're living somewhere, maybe Sardinia, maybe Sicily, and your homeland is collapsing. Climate change hits, droughts, famine, society is breaking down. What do? You flee. You band together with other desperate people, you build ships, maybe you resort to raiding and theft just to survive.
So refugees turned raiders out of desperation.
Exactly. That explains the diversity of the groups, the lack of a single leader, and maybe why their force felt so overwhelming. It just kept growing as more displaced people joined them.
That actually makes a lot of sense. It changes the whole picture.
It really does. And some did settle eventually. Some Peliset ended up in the Gaza area, became the Philistines, where the name Palestine ultimately comes from.
Wow. But okay, even if the Sea Peoples were a big part of it, they weren't everywhere, right? You mentioned Mycenae and Hattusha were inland.
Right. That's the limitation of the Sea Peoples as the only explanation. Archaeologists think Mycenae was destroyed by the Dorians, neighbors from the north. Hattusha was likely sacked by the Phrygians, old rivals. It seems more likely that other groups saw the chaos, saw the big powers weakening, trade rights disrupted, and just seized the opportunity. Opportunistic invasions piling on top of everything else.
Okay, so it's complex, which leads to another huge factor: climate change. Catastrophe level.
Yeah, the scientific evidence is pretty strong now. There seems to have been a sudden, rapid shift in the climate across the eastern Mediterranean right at the end of the 13th century BC.
How sudden? And what's the proof?
Yeah.
Like real proof?
Really compelling proof. Scientists analyze ancient pollen trapped in lake sediments. They look at oxygen isotopes and various things, and the picture is consistent. Much less rain. Severe droughts that went on for decades across the 13th and 12th centuries BC. They even see shifts in plants. Desert-type plants started growing where greener stuff used to be. It wasn't just a dry spell, it was a major, sustained environmental shock.
And we have written records backing this up, like actual letters.
We do. There's a message from a Hittite queen saying, point blank, I have no grain in my lands. Another one says, did you not know there was a famine in my lands? And maybe the most heartbreaking, a servant writing to his merchant master in Ugarit, there's a famine in your house, we will all die of hunger. Famines happened before, sure, but this one seems to have hit so fast and been so dramatic, so widespread, it suggests a system overwhelmed.
And there was a volcano involved too, Hekla 3.
Possibly, yeah. Way up in Iceland around 1100 BC, Hekla 3 had this cataclysmic eruption. Through something like 7.5 cubic kilometers of rock and ash into the atmosphere. That would create a dark shroud of dust potentially for years, blocking sunlight, cooling things down.
Like a volcanic winter.
Exactly. And we see evidence of this faraway tree rings and Irish bog oaks and bristlecone pines in the U.S. show stunted growth for decades right after that time.
So that hits the Med too. Devastating for crops on top of the drought, and the psychological impact. People must have thought it was the end of the world. Punishment from the gods, kings failing them.
Absolutely. That kind of despair could easily drive people to migrate, to raid. Linking back to the Sea People's Refugee theory, it all starts to connect these cascading factors.
So drought, famine, maybe volcanic winter.
Yeah.
And earthquakes. You mentioned earthquake storms.
Right. Another piece of the puzzle. The Eastern Med is super active, tectonically speaking. Lots of fault lines. And archae seismologists, the specialists who study ancient quakes, they've found evidence for what they call an earthquake storm between roughly 1225 and 1175 BCE.
So not just one big quake, but a whole series.
Yeah, like one big one triggers a cascade of others along the same fault system, going on for decades.
And they could tell this from the ruins. How?
It's fascinating, actually. They can distinguish earthquake damage walls falling inward, people crushed inside buildings from destruction caused by war or sacking, which leaves different signs like arrowheads, bodies in the streets, burn patterns, and they find evidence for both happening around the same time in many places.
Wow, so quakes destroying cities, triggering fires, making it impossible to rebuild, especially with everything else going on.
Precisely. Troy, Ugarit, Mycenaeans all show signs of significant earthquake damage around this period.
Okay, so putting it all together, this amazing, interconnected, globalized Bronze Age world, its biggest strength was also its biggest weakness.
That's the crucial insight, I think. That interconnectedness, the trade, the culture, the tech was fantastic when things were good, but it made the whole system incredibly vulnerable. The lifeblood was trade, especially that precarious supply of tin for bronze. That was the Achilles heel.
So any disruption, sea peoples, wars, climate disasters, cutting off trade routes.
Immediately cuts off essential resources, armies can't fight, industries stop, economies collapse. And these were highly centralized palace economies managing everything. When they broke down, society just fragmented. Chaos.
Which then feeds on itself, right? Internal problems, uprising.
Exactly. Famine, drought, disease. People lose faith in their rulers, maybe their gods. It probably led to internal uprisings, rebellions. Some historians even speculate citizens might have just risen up and burned their own cities down in despair or anger.
That's grim. And with the big powers weakened, alliances just fell apart. No one could help anyone else.
Pretty much. Everyone was scrambling to save themselves. We see clear examples of opportunism. Mycenae gets taken out by the Dorians from the north. Hattusha sacked by the Phrygians, old rivals exploiting the chaos. Babylon falls to the Elamites because its allies were too busy collapsing themselves. The theft of the Marduk statue from Babylon shows how traumatic that was.
So it wasn't like Hollywood where everyone unites against the aliens. It was more like if aliens did show up, some people would see it as a chance to attack their neighbors.
It's a cynical view, but probably closer to the truth in that kind of chaos. And then there's one more huge piece, a technological shift that changed everything.
Oh, iron. The Iron Age dawns right around the time of this collapse.
Right. Iron had been around in small amounts, sometimes from meteorites, since like 3000 BC. But widespread use really takes off as the Bronze Age system falls apart.
But iron was harder to work, wasn't it? Needed higher temperatures?
Much harder, over 1500 degrees Celsius, compared to maybe 232 for tin. You needed better furnaces, more know-how, but the breakthrough was learning how to make steel mixing iron with carbon. That made it just as sharp and hard as bronze, but way cheaper and much more readily available. Iron ore is everywhere compared to tin.
So it leveled the playing field. Like the AK-47 analogy you mentioned, suddenly smaller groups could afford top-tier weapons.
Exactly. It was a great leveler. Before, only the big empires could really afford massive bronze armies, and especially the elite chariot forces. Now, even smaller kingdoms or tribal groups could equip massed infantry with effective iron weapons. Warfare changed fundamentally.
Okay, so what happens when the technology that props up the powerful empires suddenly becomes available to everyone? That's a huge shift in power dynamic.
A massive shift. And amidst all this total destruction, Hittites gone, Mycenaeans gone, Ugarit gone. Remarkably, two big players managed to survive. Barely, but they survived.
Egypt and Assyria. Right. How did Assyria do it?
Assyria basically played defense. They cut their losses, pulled back from their outer territories that were harder to defend. They retreated into their core heartland around Nineveh, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, like a tortoise pulling into its shell, consolidating its strength in the most defensible place.
Smart.
Yeah.
And Egypt, under Ramses III, they faced the Sea Peoples head-on, didn't they? Their story's more dramatic.
Oh, incredibly dramatic. Ramses III was... Well, he was determined. He came to the throne young, 31, son of a usurper, inherited a civil war situation, probably felt immense pressure to prove himself, and by many accounts he tried to be a good ruler. Planted trees, protected women's rights, let soldiers go home in peacetime, gave loads to temples, rebuilt things, even sent expeditions to Yemen looking for old copper mines. Smart guy.
So, a capable ruler in a terrible time.
Exactly. In a stable era, he might have been seen as one of the greats. But his destiny was to rule during the twilight of Egypt's empire, this deep decline. It wasn't really his fault, but his actions definitely saved Egypt's cities from the total destruction seen elsewhere.
So how did he beat the Sea Peoples? Especially since Egyptians weren't great sailors.
You're right, they were land power archers, chariots. The Sea Peoples knew this, and they gambled on attacking Egypt's lifeline, the Nile itself, where all the cities and farms were. Ramses knew he had to fight, but on his terms.
The ambush in the Delta. That was clever.
Brilliant, really. As the enemy ships gathered and started sailing up the Nile mouths, Ramses hit a huge army of archers and spearmen in the reeds along the banks. Imagine the tension, hearing the oars, the drums, seeing those ships getting closer.
And then?
Then Ramses unleashed hell, as the inscriptions basically say, a massive continuous rain of arrows from the banks. When the Sea Peoples tried to land, Egyptian spearmen charged out of the reeds, and the Egyptian navy, smaller boats, used grappling hooks to pull enemy ships in close for frantic, brutal ship-to-ship fighting. It was chaos.
Hand-to-hand combat on the Nile.
Absolutely. Men speared, bodies everywhere. But the plan worked. The Sea Peoples were overwhelmed by the combined land and sea attack. The Egyptians were the first, and maybe only, people to really turn them back decisively. Ramses boasted about it hugely, of course. Checker and Peliset were made ashes.
An amazing victory. But Egypt still suffered afterwards. It wasn't enough.
Not nearly enough. They won the battle, but the world around them was devastated. Their trade partners were gone, the routes broken. The economy went into this steep, unstoppable decline. The treasury was empty from the war and lack of trade. Egypt never really regained its old imperial power after this. We even have the first recorded workers' strike in history during Ramses III's rain tomb builders not getting their grain rations. Shows how bad things got even at the heart of the kingdom.
And after Ramses, did they recover?
Sadly, no. The empire just fragmented. Bickering heirs, more droughts, famines, unrest, corruption. The priests gained more and more power until they were effectively the rulers. Within about 80 years of Ramses III, the empire had fractured into smaller pieces. So survival, yes, but at a huge cost.
Okay, so we've gone deep into the Bronze Age collapse, this third reset. But what does it mean in the bigger picture? You mentioned these resets might not be accidental. And our mysterious archive, all this historical analysis, it offers some fascinating context, right?
But it absolutely does. And to really grasp the different ways a civilization can reset, it's super helpful to compare the Bronze Age collapse happening between 1200 and 1100 BC with a totally different kind of catastrophe. Let's jump forward, way forward, about 2,547 years to the mid-14th century AD.
Ah, the Black Death. The plague, a completely different beast, but maybe the biggest pandemic in human history. Totally reshaped the world.
Completely. And the story often starts in Kaffa, modern Feodosia on the Black Sea. A Genoese trading post besieged in 1343 by the Mongol Golden Horde under Janibek Khan. The infamous turning point came in spring 1347.
The catapulting bodies story. Grim stuff.
Yeah. The Mongols were already dying horribly from the disease. So according to Gabriel de Mussy, a contemporary chronicler, they started launching infected corpses over the city walls. Now, debate exists. Was it effective biological warfare or just psychological terror? Modern science suggests the plague bacteria, Yersinia pestis, dies pretty quickly in dead bodies, and the real carriers were fleas on rats.
But the people inside Kaffa wouldn't know that. They just saw dead bodies raining down. Terrifying.
Absolutely terrifying. And the disease did spread like wildfire inside Kaffa. Panic, bodies piling up. One of the first victims described, Francesco, got the cough, high fever, and those horrible black swellings, the buboes, size of a fist. Medieval medicine with its humors and bloodletting, completely useless.
And then the siege was lifted, and ships left Kaffa, carrying the plague.
Exactly. Autumn 1347. Janibek Khan pulls back his decimated army, lets the ships leave. Packed with survivors, yes, but also packed with infected rats and fleas. Vessels of pestilence sailing out into the Mediterranean trade network.
And hitting Europe. Messina in Sicily, October 47. Marseille in November.
Yep. Vanessa tried quarantine, but bribery and rats had got through anyway. The scenes in the ports were horrific, ships arriving with dead or dying crews, the disease spreading instantly to the local population.
And it just went everywhere from there. Italy, France.
All across Europe and beyond. Messina to Catania, Palermo, Naples, Marseille up through France, Avignon, Lyon. Constantinople lost maybe a third of its people. Cairo, Ibn Battuta called it a city of the dead. Florence, Boccaccio's Decameron. People dying so fast they couldn't bury them.
The numbers are just mind-boggling. 30 to 60% of Europe dead. Up to 100 million worldwide.
Staggering losses. A demographic catastrophe that utterly reshaped society, economy, culture.
Okay, so connecting this back.
Yeah.
The Bronze Age collapse versus the Black Death. How do they compare as civilization resets? What's the key difference?
That's the critical question. The Bronze Age collapse was fundamentally a systemic unraveling. A perfect storm. Climate change, drought, famine, natural disasters like earthquake storms, mass migrations and invasions like the Sea Peoples, economic breakdown of that interdependent trade network, internal conflict, and a major technological shift with iron. It was a complex, multi-layered failure of an entire globalized system that had become too brittle.
And the Black Death.
The Black Death was primarily a biological catastrophe, a single, incredibly virulent disease hitting a world that was actually, kind of ironically, already recovering from its own dark ages. It caused immense disruption, huge demographic shifts, massive cultural change, absolutely. But it wasn't the same kind of complex, interwoven, systemic breakdown of the civilization's fundamental structures like we saw in the Bronze Age.
Okay, so two totally different kinds of disasters, different mechanisms. One systemic, from multiple interconnected failures within, the other a brutal external shock, a biological one. This suggests resets aren't just random accidents, but they arise from specific pressures, whether internal and systemic or external, like a pandemic. So what does this mean for us, for you listening today?
Well, the Bronze Age collapse is just this incredibly powerful, sobering reminder of how fragile civilization actually is, our own world. It's more globalized, more interconnected than ever. Very similar in complexity to that Bronze Age system. And that interconnectedness, it's our strength, yes, trade, culture, tech, moving fast. But it's also our greatest weakness. It creates the potential for these cascading failures, where one problem ripples out and triggers others across the whole system. What stands out to you about how easily these complex systems can just unravel?
It is sobering, and it hammers home that idea that you can't just point to one thing. It wasn't just the Sea Peoples, or just the climate, or just earthquakes. It was the confluence, that perfect storm of all those pressures hitting at once that overwhelmed them. It really warns against looking for simple answers to complex problems.
Yeah.
And rethinking the Sea Peoples, from villains to victims, really shows that complexity.
And the parallels today are just undeniable. A credit crisis in one country tanks global employment. A bird flu outbreak messes with food prices worldwide. A political assassination spirals into regional war through alliances. The lesson from the Bronze Age seems pretty clear. Once these big destabilizing forces, war, systemic breakdown get going, it's incredibly hard to contain the consequences. They ripple out in ways you can't predict.
There's also hope in the story, isn't there? Despite the devastation, the cultural silence, the collapse, things did eventually regrow. The lights went out, yes, leading to centuries of fragmentation, lost knowledge. But new powers, the Iron Age, slowly, painfully emerged from those ashes.
Exactly. It wasn't instant death, but the slow unraveling of the old systems eventually led to entirely new structures, new ways of organizing society, new technologies. It shows that even from profound collapse, new things can, and do, arise.
So as we finish up, maybe take a moment, you listening, to think about the cracks, the vulnerabilities in our own super-connected world. Are we really prepared for whatever the next kind of reset might look like? Can we actually learn from the Bronze Age, from the Black Death, and build more adaptability, more resilience, more wisdom into how we run things now?
A crucial question for our time.
It really is. Thank you truly for sticking with us right to the very end of this deep dive. Seriously, we know only the most inquisitive, the most dedicated listeners make it this far, and we deeply appreciate your commitment, your curiosity. What you've heard today hopefully gives you some really profound insights into the pattern shaping our world then and now.
Hope it sparks some thoughts.
Yeah. And if you're new here, if this resonated, please consider subscribing to the channel. And for everyone, please do leave a comment, hit that like button under the broadcast, it really helps. And as always, stay curious, seek the truth, because it is always there somewhere. You just have to know where to look to find it.